Why is it so difficult for classical musicians to improvise? Now, first of all, I'm not making a generalization and saying that all classical musicians are this way. This is definitely not the case, but I think it's still safe to say that most classical musicians that practice the music of the Western tradition, they have more difficulty with improvisation than musicians of other genres like blues, jazz, flamenco, folk, and so many others. Now, I am personally invested in this very question because I've struggled with quite a few things related to improvisation as a classically trained pianist and composer.
How can you follow all those cues, know what's going on based on the context, and retain all of that information musically and be able to improvise over it?
Hey, Nare, find something cool that you wrote, your thing. Find a cool chunk that we can jam on. Wherever you go, I'll find you.
Over the years, I've become a lot more comfortable with improvisation, yet I'm still a little hesitant to do it sometimes, especially in front of other people. And sometimes I just have this psychological barrier that I noticed against improvisation. Just last week, I was with a composer friend of mine who asked me to come over to his studio to help him brainstorm some ideas for a little bit of music for a picture. And because this type of thing is not very straightforward, we thought it would be best to improvise together using 2 keyboards. What I remember so distinctly about this very moment was that I was simultaneously very excited to do this and very reluctant to. I felt a little uncomfortable, self-conscious, a little shy.
Nope.
Of course, part of it was probably the fact that I haven't been around musicians like this or in a setting where I'm jamming with someone in a very long time. But still, I think there's something behind this that I want to explore a little further. An analogy that comes to mind is the difference between a very carefully and specifically crafted dialogue between 2 characters in a play and a conversation between 2 friends in real life. So of course there are some flaws in this comparison, but bear with me. Imagine a person that is only trained to recite Shakespearean monologues and dialogues, and they are a Shakespearean expert.
That am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass. I that am rudely stamped.
Even though this is absurd, just imagine them not speaking and communicating in any other manner other than Shakespearean language.
To all bear such as are of better person than myself.
Now, imagine this person being placed in a living room where there is a conversation happening between 2 people, and then they come over and they say, "Hey, how's it going?" This very moment is quite similar, in my opinion, to a classical musician going into, let's say, a jazz jam session or any kind of jam session where there is a spot open for the classical musician to improvise. Now, even if what they're being asked to do is quite simple, just improvise on 1 chord or something like that, the musician can be quite stumped, just as you would imagine this Shakespearean person to be stumped. What am I supposed to say? How's it going? I know what that is, but I'm not trained, nor am I used to responding to that.
And cry content to that which grieves my heart, and wet my cheeks with artificial tears.
Another thing that comes to mind is that the typical classical musician is playing all this repertoire throughout their day. They're practicing masterworks, basically pieces that have survived centuries and are considered the top of its class. And so they're used to listening to and performing this sophisticated material. And now when they're trying to improvise, they have to go back to almost talking like a baby. They have to scale back and really start slow and start from a place that is not as sophisticated. Now at this point, similar to learning a new language, it's probably rough. You're probably struggling just to say a few simple things.
Je suis le voisin.
Oh, all right. I'm sorry. Je suis Sam.
D'Amérique.
Oui, d'Amérique.
You mess up a lot. You feel a little insecure and confused.
Oui, tu joues... Non, non, je joue avec des voitures.
Il joue aux petites voitures.
Because of this discomfort, I think a lot of classical musicians, like myself back in the day, don't feel this huge desire to go beyond that. Because in general, of course, we're not used to having people around us and inspiration around us that constantly remind us that there is something about improvisation that will deepen your musicianship. It will offer you a very different experience with expressing yourself and being in the moment, with being spontaneous and creative, all of these different things. It's just not valued as much in classical music. So naturally, you just won't want to get over this discomfort. There's not as much incentive, and the job description also does not push us to do that. It's important to acknowledge that improvisation was actually a much bigger part of the classical music tradition back in the days of Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, Debussy, up until, even 100 years or so ago. Gradually over time, this has changed. No longer are performers improvising their own preludes, interludes, cadenzas, full pieces on stage. Now, I think there are multiple factors as to why this has happened. Some of it include just the very fact that these pieces that composers were writing became much more complex with a lot more moving parts. Composers wanted to be more specific about what they were writing and what they wanted performers to replicate. And there was more of a separation between performers and composers. If you think about pieces like large symphonic works with many, many parts involved that are tightly woven together, it's not really practical to have people improvise there. And I think also over time, sections that were dedicated for improvised solos were also more specifically written out. And this, maybe it was because composers just wanted more control, or performers wanted to be a little more secure as classical concert tradition became more formal and the stakes became higher. I'm not really sure, but that just became a thing, or rather less of a thing. The point of this video is not to weigh the pros and cons of improvisation, but to just remind people out there who are classically trained and have experienced something similar to the things that I have. It's okay if you feel a little uncomfortable. Don't try to force it, and also just acknowledge the fact that that point of entry when you are getting started and when you're starting to practice improvisation, because that is a huge part of getting better. You improve little by little. That is the hardest part. There are a lot of layers to this as well. It's not something very straightforward, so it's okay if it's difficult, if it's confusing. Okay, now let's turn to my phone, where I'm gonna pull up some answers to an Instagram poll that I just put out. I asked, if you identify as a classical musician, do you improvise? And if not, what has been stopping you? Terrified, insecure, feel like I'm lacking the knowledge to step into that world. I enjoy practicing my normal classical music repertoire. Never found the need to. Am a massive jazz fan, but it's like speaking a foreign language I haven't mastered. Thinking about all the brilliant pieces I played, every improvisation feels like garbage. Fear of sounding stupid, clueless, unoriginal, cringeworthy. Fear of doing something ugly. Yes, I improvise a lot as an organist and Baroque continuist. All of the organists that I know personally are incredible improvisers. So it is alive and well. Not knowing enough harmony theory, not knowing where to start. I know too little music theory, and there are a lot of answers similar to this. I think a lot of people think that they need to know a ton about theory before they get started. Of course, knowing more theory helps, but it's not necessarily the case. No, I get discouraged because I don't know where to start, but I would like to start. When I improvise, I feel like it is the equivalent of a 3-year-old speaking. No exposure, space, and training to do it. Yes, I do. I always wanted to do it because I think that's a really good way to express yourself. When I studied classical music 8+ years, it was never an option that teachers allowed. Now I play jazz. No, even though I'm all for it. I think it's a fear of experimentation. So a lot of these are very similar to my experience. I want to know now in reverse. Let me know in the comments what you all think. Are you classically trained? And if so, Did you experience something similar or not? I would love to know, and I think it would be great to just start a conversation here. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you very soon.